Nintendo's The Legend of Zelda series has seen countless iterations. Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed series has seen plenty of entries as well, albeit on a much more condensed timeline. While both games are very different, both have an entry that breaks the mold from all previous entries, Breath of the Wild for Zelda, and Origins for Assassin's Creed. And while both entries were received favorably, it's not far-fetched to say that Breath of the Wild was received better by longtime fans and newcomers alike. Before we get into our analysis, let me preface with this is solely our opinion here at TGP. If you prefer one game over the other, great. If you love both games, great. If you vehemently hate either game, that's cool too. Feel free to let us know your opinion in the comment section, but we do ask that you keep it civil. But in our opinion, there are a few reasons why we believe that Breath of the Wild succeeded in renewing the formula of a long-standing franchise where the Assassin's Creed series failed. Let's set the foundation with a little bit of history. A young Shigeru Miyamoto loved exploring different caves and forests where he grew up in Sonobe, Japan. Fast forward to Miyamoto coming off the success of Super Mario Bros. On the Famicom, or the Nintendo Entertainment System depending on your region, and trying to come up with the next hit for their console. Pairing up with Takashi Tezuka, they envisioned a fairy tale adventure game, drawing inspiration from titles like J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings series, the Master Sword drawing from the legendary Excalibur, and the series' titular princess and title character, named after famous novelist and painter Zelda Fitzgerald. Hyrule would be the setting, and was based off of a fantasy medieval European type land that could mold to what the game needed. Adding Koji Kondo's legendary composition, and a series was born. Most of the games in the series followed a pretty steady formula, with a few wrinkles thrown in here and there. Some call them gimmicks, but I like to think of them as a creative choice to differentiate the titles from each other. Because while most mainline games featured protagonist Link heading off on his journey to fight evil, gaining different items along the way, going through different dungeons, fighting, solving puzzles, slaying different beasts, until finally making it to the end, where the final showdown with some form of Ganon, the prototypical villain of the series, would occur. These wrinkles allowed for the titles to vary enough that it's honestly at this point how I differentiate them in my mind. Ocarina of Time is obviously the one with young and old Link. Twilight Princess is the wolf one. Wind Waker is the one where you sail the entire map. Skyward Sword is the bad one. I'm kidding. That one definitely took more time to love though. A Link to the Past is the one where you turn into a bunny. And while those games are all much more than that, the gimmicks in them allow for me to differentiate them enough that they are all unique experiences. That is not to say that Breath of the Wild is the first game in the series that strayed from its tried and true formula. Going back as far as the second title in the series, Miyamoto and Nintendo have been playing with the formula. But no matter how many times they strayed off course, they would come back to that same foundation that was set by the original game, polished by A Link to the Past, and brought into the third dimension by Ocarina of Time. That was until March 3rd, 2017, when The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild launched alongside Nintendo's newest console, the Nintendo Switch. It also launched on Wii U, and the four of us who owned one really enjoyed it on there as well. I actually own the Wind Waker HD edition, and I will never regret that purchase. Breath of the Wild was a radical departure from the Zelda formula, and at the same time it was a culmination of everything that producers Shigeru Miyamoto, Eiji Aonuma, and director Hidemaru Fujibayashi had learned in their many at-bats with the series. Things were much more open. Gone was a guide saying, "Hey, listen!" and trying to point you in the right direction. You tackled the divine beasts, the placeholder for dungeons in the game, in the order you wanted to, which was more like the first game than people might think. Or you could opt to not tackle them at all and head straight for Hyrule Castle and fight the big bad right away. Shrines, these sort of mini challenge arenas, dotted the map, and you couldn't go more than a minute without stumbling upon one. Each one contained a sort of challenge, whether it be a puzzle that used one of the game's new abilities given to Link, or a combat challenge that would do its best to either teach you a mechanic of the game organically or test your might. Physics played a much larger role, meaning you could cut down trees for resources, light things on fire to keep warm, electricity and water meant it would spread, etc. Gone were your standard potions, replaced by an in-depth cooking mechanic that allowed you to convert resources you had gathered into dishes or elixirs to help you along your way. Weapon degradation was added, which was a huge deal and still divisive to this day. In previous entries, once you got your sword, shield, and bow, they were yours. It's possible that along your way you found stronger versions, but that was maybe once or twice a game. This game completely uprooted that notion, and instead gave you a plethora of weapons, shields, and bows to find in the world with a catch. They would break over time. In my opinion, this was a brilliant way to almost force the player to interact with the world in a way that Nintendo had envisioned. You couldn't rest on your laurels and solely use your favorite weapon. You had to mix up the formula to survive. It also added in a new element of strategy for using certain weapons at certain times. They added in a climbing mechanic that allowed you to scale anything with a few caveats. A stamina wheel was added that determined how much you could climb, paraglide, or sprint. The wheel, of course, could be upgraded. Many more videos have explained the nuances of Breath of the Wild in depth, so if you are interested in how exactly everything works, you should check them out. But the point is, this game was different in a radical way. And on the other side, we have Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed series. The first entry released about 20 years after the first Zelda title, but Ubisoft wasted no time in pumping games out like clockwork. In fact, between 2009 and 2015, a new mainline Assassin's Creed game was released every year, and in 2014, they released 2 on the same day. For comparison, mainline Zelda titles usually had at least 2 years in between development, with the most recent titles actually having over 6 years separating them. I'm speculating, but I don't think it's far-fetched to say that the rapid release cycle of the AC games meant that they were far more likely to stick to the formula that they were accustomed to. But let's get a little more backstory on the series and its roots. The Assassin's Creed series was actually not even meant to be its own series when it began development. Ubisoft was coming off the success of their Prince of Persia series, and wanted to translate some of that into the 7th generation of game consoles, aka the Xbox 360 and PS3 era. Series lead Patrice Désilets, along with Jade Raymond and Corey May, wanted to take the next Prince of Persia game in a different direction, and instead of playing as the prince, they would have players play as a sort of assassin bodyguard, tasked with protecting the prince. Their research led them down a rabbit hole that snowballed into historical research, into secret societies, the Order of Assassins, and Templars. Ubisoft made the decision to spin this off into its own intellectual property, and the Assassin's Creed series was born. The game narratively straddled 2 lines: modern day and the Animus, a device that was designed to be able to analyze the genetic memories of a certain subject, allowing them to relive the memories of their ancestors. The first game launched in 2007 to decent reviews and fanfare. The historical recreation and story were applauded. However, the game featured quite a few repetitive elements and the same kind of technical struggles many of the early 360 PS3 games faced. But by the second entry, the game had hit its stride. Featuring series favorite Ezio, Assassin's Creed proved it was here to stay, and Ubisoft had dollar signs in their eyes, to say the very least. The games varied, but all could boil down into a few different aspects, starting off with assassinations. The game would give you a mission with a set target. It was up to you to find a way to end that target using different stealth mechanics and routes. You would find the best way to make sure that target didn't last very long after you entered the picture. Simple in nature, when you were in position, you pressed the assassination button and the player character would assassinate the target. Combat was animation based, meaning that when you pressed the button, the game would cycle through predetermined moves that it could use, meaning that you could consistently see the same kinds of moves used on different enemies. Games throughout the series would experiment with different weapons, like adding an extra hidden blade, the assassin's trademark weapon, or later entries adding in rifles and axes and even rifle axes. Other missions included things like tailing a target or pickpocketing certain individuals. Another huge part of the game though was the parkour system. Buildings could be scaled to give you better vantage points or get you out of a bad situation fast. However, these parkour segments were almost puzzles in themselves, as you could only use certain parts of buildings as footholds, and you had to maneuver correctly to have success, which could be made more difficult by guards shooting arrows or bullets at you, causing you to fall and have to start over, or if you were high enough, fall to your death. With the formula set, Assassin's Creed took off running. This led to a lot of success, but some saturation in the market. Then, in 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity was shoved out the door before it had time to be fully polished and cleaned, and it tarnished the reputation of the franchise, arguably to this day. Unity was an ambitious title for sure, and the lighting engine used in that game holds up to this day. Not to mention the historical accuracy of the buildings set in Paris during the French Revolution were so good that when the Notre Dame needed to be rebuilt, they actually used renderings from the game to help with the restoration. But the game was plagued with bugs, and at this point the formula was becoming stale. Syndicate was pushed out the next year, but after Unity, longtime fans' faith in the series had waned to the point where a lot of people decided to skip this one. So Ubisoft went back to the drawing board and tried to figure out where they would go from there. The Assassin's Creed brand was far too valuable for them to just ditch it, so they decided instead to change the formula completely and retool most aspects of the game, taking a lot from the wildly successful title The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, a smidge of Dark Souls and Hellblade, and just a sprinkle of Destiny in its menu layout and gear system. Assassin's Creed was reborn, and the first title in the new phase of development would be Assassin's Creed Origins. I really enjoyed AC Origins. Bayek was a very likable protagonist, and the game was very fresh. The level-based combat and gear system definitely took me changing how I approached the game, but once I was able to wrap my head around this being a different type of game, I settled in nicely. Not to mention Egypt was crafted masterfully, and with this being a story that took place before the actual Assassin's Creed itself was established, it wasn't far-fetched to think that it would be a change to the formula that at this point we had all become accustomed to. Notable changes included the animation combat system being moved over to a hitbox-based system. Curated parkour was out in favor of a climb anything, anywhere, at any time system. Also, as I mentioned, the combat became level-based, so if someone was a higher level than you, it would be a challenge to take them out. This also meant that clean assassinations were out. You might be able to get them off if you were properly over-leveled, but trying them on someone that was 5 levels above you, for instance, would only result in a certain amount of damage being applied to their health bar, even if they were sleeping. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey took what Origins did and turned it up to 11, and it was long. Long. Adding in dialogue choices and 2 protagonists to choose to play as, Cassandra was the consensus top pick. The game took you to ancient Greece and had some really remarkable mechanics. But that's where we get back to the comparison at hand, because in my opinion, this new era of Assassin's Creed put out games that anyone could argue are good games, but many will say aren't good Assassin's Creed games. However, far less are there detractors trying to claim that Breath of the Wild and its follow-up sequel, Tears of the Kingdom, are good Zelda games. So why is that? Well, I think it comes down to a few things, but a lot of it derives from the foundational principles and series identity. The Legend of Zelda series was built on the foundation of a young Miyamoto getting lost in the forest and adventuring. And so even when they had a pretty steady and successful formula they were sticking to, that's not what made the series the series. So as long as they kept that core tenet, the game would be a Zelda game. That's why other entries in the series that strayed, such as Majora's Mask or the handheld titles like Spirit Tracks, were still able to keep that feeling that the title belonged in the series. In my opinion, Zelda was not as much about the dungeons or the Master Sword or the green tunic as it was about the feeling of adventure and being able to explore a fantastical world that Nintendo had crafted. And by looking at Zelda in that light, it's easy for me to determine where the second phase Assassin's Creed games failed. While Ubisoft never had a Hyrule to change up, they maintained amazing, historically accurate recreations of different areas in different time periods. What other game series can you run through the colonial settlements, and then in the very next entry sail your pirate ship through the beautiful vistas of the West Indies? But for myself and many others, the settings were only a piece of the puzzle that made us fall in love with the series. The experience that we were an assassin, and a lot of the times the assassin, was easy to fall in love with. The methodical parkour that took time to master and understand, being able to set ourselves up over a target or behind them and take them out and blend right into the shadows. That was really what encapsulated us. I mean, if you look at the trailer for the very first game, it says as much. Altair jumps down, makes an assassination, and blends in with a group of monks. And so when you get into games like Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla, and they have that Assassin's Creed logo slapped on the box, it just doesn't quite work as well. Ubisoft wanted to make a different type of game, and that's well within their rights. But I think it was a disservice to longtime fans of the series to claim that these titles were Assassin's Creed titles, because in my opinion, they aren't. The aspects of the Creed, and the Animus, and the Assassins are at best shoehorned into the plot, almost so that Ubisoft can point to these moments and say, no guys, look, it's a hidden blade, cool right, remember that? Meanwhile, Breath of the Wild makes changes that are just as radical, and yet, it still feels like this is a version of the Link that we have played as for decades, that this version of Hyrule could fit into the convoluted Zelda timeline, and fit amongst its predecessors. I guess it all comes down to a feeling, a vibe. When you play Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they feel like The Legend of Zelda. When I play Odyssey and Valhalla, I feel like these are only kin to AC2 or Brotherhood in name alone. It's to wonder if Ubisoft maybe jumped the gun on going back to the drawing board. Instead of understanding that due to the oversaturation of AC games in the market leading to fans wanting to do less with the series, especially given the technical mess that was Unity, they could have revamped the formula and given fans of the series some time to breathe, some time to miss it. I'd like to say Ubisoft should have spun the Phase 2 titles off into their own series so we could see what they looked like independent from the Creed franchise, but luckily, they did it for me. Gods and Monsters, or Immortals Phoenix Rising, as it was later renamed after some trademark dispute with Monster Energy, because apparently us gamers are too dumb to realize that we can't pick up a copy of a game and drink it. Okay then. Either way, the game was developed by Ubisoft Quebec, who also developed, yeah, you guessed it, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. They took all that research and work they had collected on ancient Greece and decided to make a more cartoonish title, steering hard into the mythology aspect. This game took a lot from both AC Odyssey and, believe it or not, Breath of the Wild. The game received generally favorable reviews, but was not a smash success. However, it did give us a peek into what a game with the new Assassin's Creed formula could look like when unshackled from the series that it clung so desperately to. So if you enjoyed Origins, Odyssey, or Valhalla, or if you desperately believe that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are not Zelda games, that's perfectly fine. That's the opinions we're allowed to hold as gamers, and here at TGP, we will never be one to tell you that you're wrong. But we would like to start the discussion on why certain series are able to reinvent themselves successfully, looking at titles like The Legend of Zelda or Sony Santa Monica's God of War, and why other series try to reinvent and don't do as well. I'm looking forward to AC Mirage and its want to return to form while still trying to innovate on the previous titles. By the time this video goes up, that game will already be out and we should be posting a first impressions video for it. It's hard to try and figure out where Ubisoft is going with the series, as it seems like they will throw anything at the wall and see what sticks. But hopefully this title can bring back even just some of the feeling that I got as Ezio running through ancient Rome taking down the Borgias. As for The Legend of Zelda, I have full confidence in Nintendo whether they go back to a more familiar title, continue on the Breath of the Wild formula, or try something different entirely. But whatever it is, it's going to have to be running on a new piece of hardware because I think Tears of the Kingdom milked every bit of magic the Switch could offer. But what do you think? I look forward to having a dialogue about either of these series that have played such a pivotal part in molding gaming as it is today. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay authentic.